All right, welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited to bring you this session where we're going to discuss how NEST is helping to build the foundation for active surveillance of medical device safety. I'm Omar Bedawi. I've recently joined NEST as the Director of Medical Device Safety and have a major focus on active surveillance. With me is Zan Cha, who has been leading the work in this area and will present shortly on the great progress to date. Next slide, please. In addition to Zan, I'm honored to have an incredible group of panelists who represent a diverse set of perspectives on the active surveillance program, and I hope we'll have a very lively discussion here on some key issues. Brief overview, Zan and I will give a brief presentation on active surveillance program, help level set where we're at today, and then we're very fortunate to have Jacqueline Major, who is a supervisory epidemiologist at FDA CDRH, speak for a few minutes on the FDA perspective for this active surveillance program. And on our panel, I'm very excited to welcome a great group here today, with starting with Kathy Blake, Vice President of Healthcare Quality at the American Medical Association. From an industry perspective, we have April Lavender, Senior VP of Government Affairs at Cook Group. And also there's Paul Copland, VP and Global Head of Medical Device Epidemiology and Real-World Data Sciences at Johnson & Johnson. For a patient privacy perspective, we have Rachel Hendricks-Stirrup from the Health Policy Council and Future Privacy Forum. And last, but certainly not least, I'm really grateful to have Steve Makita here, who's a tremendous patient advocate and board member of the SMA Foundation. So without any other delay, let's get started. Next slide, please. So first, let's briefly cover what NEST Coordinating Center is. So NEST CC is a coordinating center for the National Evaluation System of Health Technology. We're part of an independent, nonprofit medical device innovation of the Independent Nonprofit Medical Device Innovation Consortium, also known as MDIC. And it was established through an FDA grant. So NEST is focused on innovation to advance our understanding of medical devices through use of real-world data. And we see that these advances will really improve how devices are tested, approved, and monitored for safety and efficacy, which will allow people to get the greatest benefit possible out of medical device innovation, but at the same time limiting their exposure to potential harms. Next slide. So brief history of NEST is that the idea of NEST originated back in 2012, and the FDA awarded funding to develop NEST to MDIC back in 2016. The Active Surveillance Task Force started in 2019, and the IT Cloud Working Group was established last year. So that brings us to where we are now. And in a moment, Zan is going to provide some details around that. Next slide. And just before I hand it off to Zan, I quickly want to cover what active surveillance actually is. In broader terms, you can think of active surveillance as, or you can think of surveillance as either passive or active. And passive surveillance is essentially when you're being reactive and passively allowing information to come to you. Active surveillance, on the other hand, is when we're being proactive in establishing a system to go out and search for signals in the data. And so as many of you know, most devices are approved by the FDA based on results of very well-controlled clinical trials. These are critically important to understanding the effect of devices. However, there are limitations. And some of the limitations are that once a device is used in the real world, it can be subject to uncontrolled circumstances, which can expose issues with learning curves and maintenance, as well as issues with fair representation of different patient populations. Quality and safety of device may also degrade over time, especially over horizons that are far outlast when the clinical trials ran for initial approval. And by using larger data sets, we can uncover rare events that may not have been picked up during clinical trials. So, next slide. And with that, I will hand it over to Zan to talk about where we're at today with the Active Surveillance Initiative.
Thanks, Omar. So you just heard what active surveillance really allows you to do. And now I wanted to give you an overview of how we plan to deliver that capability. So the technical architecture is based on federated learning and analytics. It doesn't pool data from multiple data sources. Rather, this approach enables us to do collaborative analytics and data science using a centralized orchestration on decentralized data. So we are only going to be pulling insights or results back to the central orchestrator. Specifically then, Nest has a central cloud, as you see on the right side of the screen. As of this week, the initial phase 1 production environment has been deployed. And in this environment, Nest is going to manage several things. Top bubble showing we will be managing central cloud infrastructure, updates and deployments, creation and distribution of a common data curation and standardization method. We'll be controlling data quality, and we'll be managing and creating analysis packages. We'll also use that centralized organization to orchestrate our studies and synthesize results, as well as watch for signals and detect those signals. The network of the collaborators that we do have today at Nest is really going to contribute towards a federation. And a federation is going to be collaborators who choose to participate in active surveillance. So these are different organizations, whether they're health systems, registries, etc., institutions that have real-world data to contribute to the study. Communications from study invitations and instructions to data standardization and analysis packages are going to be issued from the central cloud down to each collaborator, as shown by the arrows in the diagram. And in response, messages and summary results will be sent back from the collaborator to the central cloud. Critical to our operations are several things. First, we have to standardize data at the edge. So that means cleaning, harmonizing data, and quality checking data to make sure that we have both integrity and validity of our data, both initially upon setup and maintained over time. Secondly, we need to standardize algorithms that run on the data sets. So this is the analytic component. So we need to be able to develop analytic tools centrally and then distribute them so that they run independently at each collaborating institution's environment. And then third, we need to really make sure that we learn from successful deployments of similar technologies so that we can speed up development and deliver services earlier. Next slide. So while Nest is leading the effort to bring innovation to active surveillance for medical devices, we're also making efforts to involve multi-stakeholder task forces, working groups, etc., and also making sure to include patients in all of our groups. So we really see there being 4 pillars of strategy for Nest as we build this solution. So first, if we look at technical reasons and strategic goals, we certainly want to leverage a technology that contributes to maintaining patient privacy, and that federated analytics model is the approach that we are going to leverage for that. We also believe that with this idea of having the federated network of partners, that will enable us to expand our research participation and essentially expand the coverage of our surveillance in terms of patients and devices being used in the real world. And thirdly, on the technical note, by having a focus on using open source code, open APIs, and open analytics as well as maintaining this multi-stakeholder focus of engagement, we really do wish to promote innovation in this space. The second pillar is talking about our data strategy. So the focus here, as I alluded to earlier, very critical for us if we're going to run in a federated analytics environment, that we carefully standardize and curate our data so that as we wind up consolidating results across different sources, we do have a quality product. Part of that will be accomplished through the development of a common data model, which NEST is actively involved in right now. Likely, our focus right now is heading towards a hybrid approach of leveraging an existing data model and bringing to bear additional fields that help us characterize devices. We also are logging metadata throughout our system so that we ensure traceability. We do have top of mind the fact that we need to establish mechanisms and sort of data governance strategies to both discover and mitigate bias, as well as look towards the future to see how we can actually augment data that our partners are bringing in and potentially enhance areas such as UDI utilization and associated data sets that we can grab from other sources. The third pillar is focused on the patient experience. So as you saw earlier, the vision and mission of NEST are very clearly patient-centric. So we want to make sure that is covered. And additionally, have practical ways of facilitating value directly to patients, both through transparency and traceback, so that we fulfill the goal of improving the timeliness of safety through this active surveillance program. Finally, on the operational development side of things, we are very cognizant that we need to develop repeatable, scalable digital workflows to make sure that we operate in a streamlined manner. We are actively expanding the research network, so of data partners. We need to align to various privacy and industry standard IT quality standards, as well as strive to support continuous innovation in our program. Next slide. So regarding current and upcoming activities, I'll point out that NEST's current network includes over 161 million patients as of today, multiple types of real-world data, and is poised to expand this year. And we'll be issuing some guidance for those of you who may be potential future data partners to join us. Next slide. And there are really four key areas of focus today beyond the expansion of the data network. And the puzzle pieces show the interlocking nature of these different initiatives that we're focused on. So first, we are shaping our initial test and validation studies. And the four topical areas are likely focus for those coming up in the 2022 timeframe. Secondly, the puzzle piece indicating patient input. We want to keep front of mind that patients are the reason why we're here, continue to include their voice in our working groups, in our panels, and in ensuring that there is value in what we're delivering from the get-go. Third, I mentioned the common data model. So the idea of selecting one of these four common models and really hybridizing it to ensure that we can correctly and adequately characterize devices for our studies is the direction that we're headed today. And finally, in terms of methodologies, we're looking to essentially expand our capability set from our current sort of phase 1 method, which is a program called Delta that we have integrated into our phase 1 system from Leahy Health System. We are certainly at this time exploring additional analytic capabilities and exploring which ones we will include as a point of expansion into the system, as well as making sure that we are able to select different methodologies that will allow us to characterize and deliver solid research across a variety of different use cases. So next slide. With that, I would like to introduce Jacqueline Major from the Office of Clinical Evidence and Analysis over at FDA.
Thank you, Zan. Next slide, please. FDA's mission is to protect and to advance the public health. The Center for Devices and Radiological Health is committed to the enhanced evidence generation across the total product life cycle, utilizing relevant and reliable real-world data to help inform both timely and efficient regulatory decisions for medical devices. In accordance with FDA's 2018 Medical Device Safety Action Plan, the Center envisioned building and operationalizing a national system based on input of real-world data to advance safety signal detection, refinement, and verification. Next slide, please. Thank you. To this end, the Nest Coordinating Centers Cloud is a foundational infrastructure supporting FDA's strategy to advance the use of real-world evidence through a multi-stakeholder national system. As part of this strategy, the system would have the capability of continuously monitoring and evaluating large real-world data based on routine clinical device usage. The potential to enable stakeholders to make timely, evidence-based decisions for patient safety, and the ability to leverage Nest's ecosystem's real-world evidence expertise and resources to support the acceleration of patients' access to safe and effective medical technologies. Next slide, please. Data quality and scientific integrity are crucial in real-world evidence generation to support regulatory decisions. To ensure high quality in terms of reliability and reproducibility and robustness of study designs, the data, and the methodological approaches, the FDA is working closely with the Nest Coordinating Center and other stakeholders to develop ecosystem standards for data quality and research methods, including metrics as outlined in 2 recent frameworks in the Active Surveillance Roadmap. Next slide. Nest is anticipated to transform medical device safety surveillance by accelerating the speed of analysis through its cloud-based data management system and analytics platform. Important for FDA is that the system has the capability to perform continuous active surveillance of post-market medical device data, provide evaluations based on the generation of high-quality real-world evidence supported by guidelines and standards, have robust technical capabilities stored in secure, scalable, and modular environments, supports future innovative methods development work, uses validated study endpoints, and has the ability to provide rapid response information and quickly detect emerging safety signals. Next slide, please. Gearing up for this next phase, in which we plan to build out this infrastructure, expanding the network of collaborators and establishing a more dynamic overall data system. By expanding the network of collaborators, we gain access to more information, larger samples that will enable the detection of rare conditions and rare safety signals, and enhances the diversity of the settings and patient populations, including underrepresented populations. To do so will require addressing challenges, such as the de-identification of data, interoperability, and traceability. To establish a more dynamic overall system will require the implementation of a common data model that's adapted for medical device purposes. Ensuring that data standards are in place and building advanced analytics beyond Delta for enhanced detection and discernment of known and new signals using state-of-the-science technologies and advanced analytics, and the creation of automated surveillance with alerts and dashboards. Importantly, employing procedures that will ensure reliability, reproducibility, and transparency. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to provide FDA's perspective today, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jacqueline. Really great to hear how important this is to the FDA, and obviously this is a very important topic and initiative for all of us. So, I want to jump in and get some thoughts from our panel here today. First, start with kind of a general question. I'd like to hear a couple of thoughts on why active surveillance is an important issue from your unique perspective and what motivated you personally to get involved with this program. I'm going to start that off with Kathy. Love to hear your thoughts and what, stimulated you to get involved with this.
So it's always welcome to see the history of the development of NEST, having been on the planning board and having been on the governing committee since the founding of it. And my motivation is really as a clinician. And if you practice long enough and you see enough patients with medical devices, you realize that there will be times when the devices do not perform optimally or perhaps as well as you might have hoped. And my motivation is very simple. It's that I want my patients to have access to medical devices. I've seen lives saved as a result of that. I'm a cardiologist. But the second part is if there is an issue that's arising, I want it rigorously evaluated. I want the number of people, the number of folks that are affected potentially by that unexpected performance to be as small as possible. So for me, it's an area under the curve. I want the curve to be observed, reported as quickly as it reasonably can be.
Great points. Thank you. April, would you like to chime in maybe on your thoughts from a perspective from industry?
Yes, of course. Kathleen, I really appreciate your perspective there. There's been a lot of development in the device world for coronary therapies, and I think they're extremely important. And we've seen over the past decades the iteration of those devices to help make the procedures even more beneficial for patients. So I think it's very important. And active surveillance is certainly, I believe, one of the most important initiatives that we're going to come together to build, which is an upgrade we have needed to build in terms of monitoring medical device safety over time. And I think timelines of getting the information reported is going to be something that we will be discussing quite a bit and talking about in terms of having an immediate indicator of the safety and performance at the point of care for a medical device. So I think that developing the system and looking at the devices we've selected will give us a lot of learning about what kinds of questions need to be asked as part of our data analytics. So I'm motivated to be a part of the team in looking at what are the questions, what are the key pieces of information that we need to capture. And I think that's a lot of the work that we'll be looking at in the next few months to come. So I really appreciate the opportunity for this exciting challenge that we have.
Great, thanks. And I think, Steve, as a patient advocate, I imagine you've got a couple things to say here too. So,
thanks, Omar. Hello, everyone. I was absolutely thrilled and excited, and I get emotional every time I think about the promise and hope and innovation of active surveillance from a patient standpoint. Medical devices have not only extended my life, but saved my life on multiple occasions. I can't be more grateful for them in my life. Active surveillance is not just a term, it implies a very real, authentic, ongoing relationship between industry, providers, and regulators and patients. Real world data is about or are about that relationship. It's an ongoing conversation between you, your medical device, regulators, and those checking for signals. So it's something that I jumped at because I was privileged to work as a member of the planning board for Sentinel for 4 years. And now to have this opportunity extended to me, it really is a great, great opportunity, not only to have a seat at the table, but to elevate the patient voice and to have my voice, my opinions on the same level as any other stakeholder around the table. So it's just a thrill. Thank you so much.
thank you. And I think it's clear we speak for everybody here that having you and your participation has just been wonderful, and looking forward to much more continued work together with you and the group. And there's a lot of other people involved with this that aren't here on the panel today, so we don't want to ignore that. But you sort of bring up there are some challenges and difficulties with putting a program like this together. Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about some of those challenges in developing, implementing, and adopting active surveillance? What your thoughts are there?
Sure. Thanks, Omar. Well, firstly, I would just like to really thank NEST for doing this work, because it's really important work, and NEST is a critical piece in the ecosystem to catalyze this work and make it happen. And also thank FDA for FDA's focus on this and for supporting NEST. So personally, my first post-marketing surveillance program was for the chickenpox vaccine which was licensed in 1996. And that involved a 15-year follow-up of 15,000 children, the first 15,000 children vaccinated with chickenpox. And we had 98% follow-up after 15 years. And since that time, I've just been doing post-marketing studies since 1995. The last one was for opioids, where we did a class post-marketing program with 13 companies to look at what are the serious risks in terms of overdose and addiction associated with opiates when used by patients for pain control. And in medicine, there's two branches of treatments. There's surgery and medications and vaccines. And so we've done a lot of work in the past 2 or 3 decades on post-marketing surveillance for medications, but very little on surgeries. And devices are often the surgical aspect of medicine. So it's great to be bringing some of the understandings and methodology that's been developed on the medication side to the surgery side. So what does it take? Well, a key factor is identifying the medical devices. That's been one of the big burdens, what we call UDI, unique device identifier, getting that in the data so we can track which unique device is used has been a great hurdle. But we are slowly chipping away at that hurdle and finding ways to identify unique devices. The other factor is, what are the outcomes we measure? So how do we measure the success of, for example, a spinal fusion? So one aspect would you could look at radiographic fusion, but then you'd have to have radiographs, and that's kind of difficult to get. Or you could look at whether the person comes in for a resurgery. If they come in for a resurgery in a year's time, that's not a good thing. But it may not capture everything you want to capture, or you could capture patient-reported outcome measures. So one of the other aspect is, how do you measure a performance well? And I think all of the surveillance for medical devices is really critical, because about 95% of medical devices are approved by a 510K pathway, which means that there's no clinical data for the approval. And so measuring how well they do in terms of safety and performance in the post-marketing environment is important, because there just isn't that clinical data pre-approval. So the importance of post-marketing data gets more important. And then there's the federated model that we've talked about, where, because there isn't a huge amount of usage in any one surveillance system, so we have to have a federated model to get the sample size to be able to look for rare adverse events. And those are all aspects of the work that NEST is undertaking in this active surveillance group.
Yeah, so you bring up a lot of great points about the challenges with data integration, trying to get different sources. In order to do that, we've got to be able to share data more readily. You've got to be able to link different data sources. All of that comes with some privacy and security issues. So, Rachel, I'm sure you have quite a perspective from that side. If you want to talk a bit about the challenges from a privacy side with this active surveillance initiative.
Sure. Well, I think we all can agree that, privacy is certainly one way to ensure safety for individuals. Really, safety looks like, in this particular case, safety from being re-identified. For example, especially if they're being actively monitored for a sensitive health condition, whether it be a mental health condition or addiction. We're talking about opioid abuse as an example. So privacy is certainly a virtue in these circumstances and scenarios of active surveillance. So as we start to think about the future of privacy from an active surveillance standpoint, especially with regard to medical devices, we're starting to see a lot of different types of devices emerge in the scene. And some of these devices may or may not be FDA approved. They can exist on a person's smartphone, for example. And a person's smartphone nowadays, as we all know, has the capability of monitoring a person's condition, such as heart rate, signs for atrial fibrillation, for example, in very precise ways. So there's some reliability and accuracy there, but at the same time, there are privacy loopholes to consider when these apps or devices are built on third-party platforms, for example, that might not comply with certain privacy standards, especially if those standards are misaligned across the board. This is particularly true for clinical trials that are conducted globally, as many of you all know. So just trying to find a common data model or standard that meets privacy policy standards, as well as privacy by design standards that an institution might have adopted, that is a challenge. So again, just thinking about compliance with those standards, it really depends on what the country perceives as privacy risks to their residents and citizens. So, for example, countries that might collaborate with American pharmaceutical companies for clinical trials, multi-site clinical trials, there are country and perhaps company-specific policy regulations or provisions with regard to data privacy and anonymization that must be adhered to. Those are, or at least that's just one particular aspect to consider with regard to privacy and understanding the role of medical devices, given that they accompany a wide range of benefits for both patients and clinicians that are actively monitoring them. There are still other parties, or what we like to call third parties, that when involved could introduce certain privacy risks to both clinicians and patients in the process of exchanging data within and across various platforms that are connected to a cloud. And there are some solutions to these issues. And I guess one particular solution that I can just share right now with regard to addressing privacy-related risks, one considers, for example, the broad adoption of a dedicated software that can address privacy issues by design, because they only share anonymized or aggregated data under a common data model. So that's what we tend to strive for when trying to understand the best privacy preserving manner and mechanism for receiving and sharing active surveillance data broadly across clinical trials, especially when they're conducted at a global scale.
Great, thanks. And yeah, that really is a great point. There's been a lot of innovation in this area to protect privacy, and that's a big driver of a federated system that allows data to stay where it's originally, owned and housed and secured, and just bring back results to a central source where everything's anonymized, as Zan mentioned earlier. So thanks for that. Real quick, I want to jump back to Jacqueline. Thanks again for the great overview earlier. Would like to hear a bit about, from an FDA perspective or personal perspective, if that's the importance there, what's the difference between active surveillance and other approaches such as post-approval studies, 522 studies? How would a NEST active surveillance system be interpreted in comparison with those? Is it an add-on, part of it, a replacement? What's the perspective there?
Yeah, great question, timely question. Recently, FDA released 2 draft guidances for the mandated study program, one for post-market surveillance studies, the 522s, and the other for the post-approval studies, the past studies that you mentioned. So the mandated studies may be required at the time of approval of a pre-market application. They're typically intended to gather specific data on specific questions about the post-market safety and effectiveness of a certain device. And a potential challenge with recruitment is recruiting patients to participate in a study after the product has been approved and marketed, since there's less incentive to enroll for them. And the time it takes to design, implement, and complete the studies as well. So definitely see NEST active surveillance as complementary to these other modalities that we have available. It provides a timelier, less burdensome ongoing surveillance approach across the device space, includes more diverse populations and settings. And by linking the existing clinical-based data that's available, whether it's EHR systems, medical claims data registries, doing this in conjunction with other modalities, the totality of the information may provide a more comprehensive and accurate framework for assessing safety and devices post-market.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, clearly it's an area we're all excited about. I think we're coming up at the end of our time here, so I want to open if there's any other comments anybody wanted to add. Feel free to chime in. Yeah, Kathy.
I know the focus oftentimes in these conversations is on identifying suboptimal performance. And actually, that's where I started from. But I think it's equally important that if there is a signal, that signal be evaluated in such a way that if the performance proves out to be as expected, that we know that as well. Because we don't want devices to be judged as not working well when they actually do. It goes back to the comments that Steve made, for example. These can be life-saving devices. And so a decision to no longer make a device available is also a very important decision to get right.
That's a great point, Kathleen. And so what you're saying there is that we can also use this system for understanding the benefits better than just looking for faint noise that we might see in a performance bucket, rather than not considering the benefits that we currently have.
Thanks. And, if just wrapping that up, Steve, I mean, do you want to have one more moment to talk about the active surveillance system and what it really means for you and the future state of device surveillance, and how would it benefit patients the most? Obviously, we see both sides of that coin here.
Thank you. Well, it's just this ongoing reassurance that I have someone and a lot of people looking in on me on what matters most to me, not only on a day-to-day basis, but on a year-to-year basis. And when you have that reassurance and you have that information, choice, privacy, security, autonomy, transformation, innovation, they're not just words. They are our lives. They speak to both our dreams and our nightmares, our frustrations, our aspirations. The people involved in these devices are real people too. And they work all their lives on these devices, and they worry about people like you and me. And so active surveillance is just about a very authentic, transparent, and transformative relationship about all of us. And it's just something that is so embracing, and it brings in people who have for too long been forgotten, ignored, and neglected. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful tool in FDA's quest to make life healthier and safer for all of us.
Incredibly well said. Thank you. I don't think there's much more to add other than that, really sums up why we're all so passionate about this and such an important topic, and really an honor to have such a great diverse panel here today to cover this. So thank you all, and look forward to continuing our work together.